I'll work them out on you. Okay, so this morning, how many of you guys had a really good week this week? Really great? You guys are like, I've never been more like Christ than I was this week. That's how I feel. I'm just kidding. I actually am genuinely excited to be here, but I always, whenever I think about talking in front of people, I'm like, yeah, I can do that. That's really easy. And then I get up here and I don't know how to open my laptop. So just bear with me, but we'll dive in. This past week for me, which always turns out this way whenever there's something coming up, whenever you think, oh, there's this big moment coming, and you're working really hard to prepare for it, things always just start popping up. So this week has felt like an entire year, and I was being dramatic. If you ever think, oh, Kara's dramatic, I'm more dramatic in my head than I'm actually out loud, so it gets worse. But I was like, how did I get myself into this situation? This is literally ridiculous. Why am I here again? And not just preaching, but how did I end up in North Battleford? How did I end up as the mother of 2 children? And just being really dramatic all week. Not all week, but my whole life. So anyways, I was going through and I was retracing my steps till this moment because every time I was praying about what to preach on, this is all I could think of. So I was like, I wouldn't be here this morning if I just wouldn't have invited Lee and Candace over one evening. If I would have just never invited them over, they would have never asked me. But I wouldn't have invited them over, or I wouldn't have said yes. Lee wouldn't have asked me to preach, if he didn't know me. And he wouldn't know me if I didn't come to this church. And I wouldn't be involved in the church if I didn't know it existed. And I wouldn't know it existed if I wasn't friends with Danae. And I wouldn't be friends with Danae if Jardith didn't introduce me to her. And I wouldn't know Jardith if he didn't lead worship at a camp I was working at years ago. And I wouldn't have been at that camp if my parents weren't involved in a church that supported that camp. And my parents wouldn't have been attending that church if they didn't live in Kindersley. And my parents wouldn't be living in Kindersley if there were jobs in BC 30 years ago. And my parents wouldn't be looking for jobs in Saskatchewan if they didn't have 2 small kids. And they wouldn't have 2 small kids if they never got married. And they wouldn't have gotten married if they never met. And my parents would have never met if my aunt didn't introduce them. And my aunt would have never introduced them if they didn't go to the same Bible college. And my mom would have never went to that Bible college if she never became a Christian. And she would have never become a Christian if her friend didn't invite her to youth group. And her friend wouldn't have invited her to church if her friend wasn't a Christian. And it goes back further and further and further. And we could keep going back for each and every single one of you guys individually. You guys could sit there and say, I wouldn't be sitting in this spot this morning if ... fill in the blanks, beyond what happened this morning, beyond what happened this week. But we all have this little legacy that we're walking out. The amount of small, faithful, exciting, and some terrifying yeses that have led to this moment where I'm standing here before you guys today are too numerous to count. And this got me thinking about the moments that really matter. What actually matters in the grand scheme of our life. And I've put a lot of thought and prayer into what I will say today. But I couldn't help but think the messages that my life will preach the loudest are not the ones that I'll say into the microphone. It's the things I say while I'm eating supper with my family, my response to my children when I'm overwhelmed, the way I treat my friends when I'm having a bad day, my integrity, my character, my motivations, who I am and what I say in seemingly insignificant moments. The messages that will preach the loudest and remember the longest are the ones that each and every one of us preach subconsciously every day. Last week, Lee preached about looking forward and anticipating what is to come. And that's my favorite thing to do. Are there any dreamers out there? Do you guys just love to dream about one day? One day you'll be everything you ever wanted to be. One day I'll have enough money I can buy everything I want. One day I'll just wake up and be able to run a marathon. One day my children will see and appreciate everything I do for them. One day God will give me the house I dream of. One day this and one day that, and we can just dream all day about one day. And that's not really the message that Lee preached in regards to what we're anticipating, but it did get me thinking, are we ready for one day? Are we ready for what is to come? Will we recognize what we are anticipating once it arrives, or will our emphasis on particular moments block our view? Will our expectations of who God should be hold us back from participating in who God is? Will our character be able to handle the position that awaits us? Because do we expect to just wake up one day and run a marathon if we've never even worn running shoes? Do we expect to be able to be financially stable without ever working a job? Do we expect to be the leader at a place we've never served? You see, we dream about one day and this picture-perfect one day, and that's where it ends. That's where we leave it, is one day. But there's so many moments in our lives that lead us up to who we are even right now. And some of us are living exactly what we hope for one day. We have kids, we have a car, we're working the job we want, whatever it is, you can fill in your own blanks of what you want. But this morning I want to go over a few stories in the Bible, and they're kind of conceptual, so it's not like they're found in like Exodus 32 only. It's like we're going to go over the Israelites and a brief journey of little moments that led them to big moments, and how really they weren't ready for it, even though years and years and years of promises and prophecies were preparing them. Their character and their attitudes were not ready for the blessing that the Lord had for them. So, long story short, and again, I'm just briefly touching on it. This is not word for word what the Bible says. So read it yourself if you want to know what it says word for word. But long story short, there's a man named Jacob, and most of you guys know him. He wanted to marry Rachel. He thought she was really beautiful. Rachel's dad tricked him, gave him his other daughter, the ugly one. That's mean. But that is how the Bible describes her, and that's not nice. So anyways, but he ends up with both of them, so he has 2 wives now, which the Bible records it, doesn't condone it. You get 1 wife. That's how it works. But Leah gives him 10 sons, and Rachel gives him 2. They become the 12 tribes of Israel. Rachel's sons were Jacob's favorite because Rachel was his favorite wife, and there's a lot of things wrong with that. But his dad gives Joseph a coat of many colors, and Joseph is the guy that has lots of dreams in the Bible. And he's like, oh, I had a dream to all of his brothers who hate him, and I was standing on a hay bale, and I rose above you guys, and I'm better than you. And so they hate him, right, as you would. So they're like, you know what, we don't like this guy. He's our dad's favorite. He thinks he's better than us. I know what will knock this guy down a peg. If we sell him into slavery. So then Joseph and his brothers, they sell him into slavery. And after lots of trials and various situations, Joseph ends up rising as a high official and becomes second to the Pharaoh. So he goes from like a slave to second in command. He spends a lot of years in prison, and then he ends up ruling in the palace, which probably could be a sermon all on its own. But I'll stay focused. He ends up essentially sorting out all of Egypt by being able to interpret a dream that the Lord had given to this official. And he was able to interpret it. And so Joseph does a lot of really good things for Egypt. He sets them up so that they're not dying and poor during this 7-year famine. And everybody loves Joseph. He's a good guy. He's got a nice coat, and he saves the day. So now Egypt is wealthy and powerful, and during the 7-year famine, they're the only ones that essentially don't run out of resources. And at this point, a bunch of Israelites are in powerful positions within Egypt. And the thing about Israel, which kind of is a common theme that people hate in the Old Testament, is that they keep having babies. And I don't know why that triggers everybody in the Old Testament so much, but it ends up being a really big problem for them that they can't just stop having babies. So Joseph dies, sad day. The next guy comes in, and he's not as nice as Joseph, and he's triggered that there are so many Israelites in wealthy and powerful positions. within Egypt. And he's like, these guys, they're going to overtake us. And so he goes and he seeks out the wise advice of an astrologer. And the astrologer's like, yeah, actually, all your fears are true. They are going to become more numerous than you, and they're going to take over, so you got to stop this problem. And so this Pharaoh is like, yeah, this is my worst nightmare. So instead of just hoping, like being nice to them and hoping they don't try to overtake our kingdom, we're going to make them slaves, because then they won't even try. They'll be less than us. So they put these really unrealistic expectations on these slaves, and they work them really hard. It's dangerous, and like honestly, nobody ever in the history of the world has worked harder than a Hebrew slave, okay? They worked hard. You should read that if you ever don't want to go to work one morning, and you might feel better about it. But anyways, the conditions were terrible, but the Israelites, they're still having babies, and that is upsetting. So the Pharaoh is like, we'll make it harder. They'll have to work harder, longer hours, do more jobs. They'll have to meet more quotas. And then that'll slow them down from having babies. But the Israelites are like, no, we will have babies. And the Pharaoh is obviously really mad about this. And so he is kind of backed into a corner. Not really. He's being dramatic, but I relate to it. He was backed into a corner, and he's like, the only way I can stop them from becoming more than us in numbers is if we toss all the baby boys into the river. Seems logical and fair. So they are not going to become stronger than us or more powerful because we're going to toss them into the river. So we're going to fast forward a touch, just like a couple chapters. And here we are with Moses. Moses is born. He's an Israelite. And the officials are coming. They're going to take him and toss him into the river. And his parents are like, nay, nay, not our boy. The Lord has plans for him. So they put him in a basket and they float him down the river. And his older sister, Miriam, follows along the riverbank to make sure he stays safe. And this baby Moses floats up on the Pharaoh's daughter, who's bathing in the river. And she doesn't really seem concerned, at least from what we can see in the text, that she's like, where did this baby come from? She's like, finders keepers, this one's mine now. And so she sees Miriam off a little way, and she's like, this baby is going to need to eat. Like, go find me like a wet nurse, essentially. And so Miriam runs back, grabs her mom, which is really cute, and her mom, the mother of Moses, gets to come and nurse Moses. Also still a sad story because she doesn't like get to actually raise him, but anyways, terrible story, lots of beautiful moments, and that could describe the whole Old Testament. But Moses, he grows up as royalty. He's raised as an Egyptian. And he has all of their customs and practices and traditions, and he acts like them, he walks like them, he talks like them. He is one of them. And one day, or at least the Bible kind of makes it appear like just one day, I'm sure there was much more stirring under the surface, but one day, Moses is like, you know, the way we treat these slaves, that's messed up, guys. And he sees an Egyptian beating one of the slaves, and he gets mad, and he attacks the Egyptian, and he ends up killing them. Which, bad news, because this is already the Pharaoh's fear that the Israelites will be able to overpower the Egyptians. And Moses, although he acts and talks like an Egyptian, he is an Israelite. So Moses is like, yeah, this isn't going to be good, so I'm going to run away. And he runs away, and he finds himself in a new town, meets a lovely lady, they have children, happily ever after. Except, like, not really, because Moses, like, this is kind of where, like, all the cartoons end, because it's like, this is a beautiful story, and then it gets messy, and they kind of cut it off. But Moses is working as a shepherd, and one day, one of his sheep gets away, and as a good shepherd, he goes off to find his lost sheep, and he stumbles across a burning bush. And I mean, that's like kind of the call of Moses, and it's like actually a really big deal. He has to take his sandals off because he's standing on holy ground and all that stuff. And then the bush is burning, it's consumed with flames, but it's not burning up, and it ends up being God. Plot twist. And so God is like, go free my people from Israel, or from Egypt. Go command Pharaoh to do this. And Moses is like got a lot of excuses. He's like, I'm a stutterer, God, I can't go. And God's like, true, you are a stutterer. So instead of taking away his stutter, he says, you can bring Aaron, who Aaron is a very eloquent speaker, but a real dumb guy if you read the story. So anywho, they go and they say, let my people go. And there's these plagues and these promises and these prophecies, and God's promising himself to the Israelites. He's coming back for them. He's going to set them free. He's marking them as his chosen people once again. And yeah, beautiful. They walk out of the promised land, or, well, they never make it there, but they walk out of slavery and they walk across a parted river, and it's this beautiful moment. God's promises came true. These people are rescued from their captivity. They're rescued from their bondage. But there's like, as you can tell in this really long story, there's millions of little, seemingly insignificant moments that lead to these huge moments. Like Moses going to get the sheep, just casually doing his job, and he stumbles across God in the form of a burning bush. And these little moments that seem like no big deal, or I just have to do this, or this is just my job, or this is just how we do it, or these little moments where you're like, I don't really know if I want to do that, God, like I'm a stutterer. And then you end up going anyways, and you end up walking across a sea on dry land with thousands of Israelites that are returning to God's land. But the frustrating thing in the Old Testament, when you read these stories, is that God's people, they just couldn't get it. Like, I'm sure they tried, but they, on the other side of that river, they were found to be rebellious, disobedient, and unfaithful time and time again. Like, the amount of chances and direction and, like, hope that was being poured into them, and they were still like, at least we had food in Egypt. At least we had this in Egypt. Like, you were literally a slave, but at least you had. And we can kind of look at our own circumstances like that. We're like rescued from what God has promised, and he's brought us into what he's preparing for us. And we can go, well, at least we had this. And we can start to downplay the promises and the blessing of God. You see, when God was giving the law to Moses, God and Moses were up on a mountain, and the Lord was like, you know, thou shalt not steal, that law, and a bunch of other instructions. And the Israelites were down at the bottom of the mountain building a golden calf. When God was literally raining down food from heaven as proof that he will provide everything every day that these people need, they were like, we can't trust that God will show up tomorrow, so we got to gather up all we can now. When God set up a tent of meeting where his spirit would dwell and they could enter in, the people hid in their own tents. They couldn't get it. They didn't understand that God was faithful. They couldn't understand that God wanted relationship with them. They couldn't understand that there was a promised land coming and he was leading them to it. And all they had to do was believe that he was the one true God. Because although they knew what was promised, they couldn't recognize that they were in it. Because they had their own plans and their own ideas. And they walked around the same mountain for 40 years because just for the life of them, they could not understand that God was the one true God. And they missed out on the promised land because they had expectations of who God should be and what God should be doing. And it's the same when Jesus came. People for years had these prophecies and these promises and these stories of what a Savior would look like. And Jesus showed up and they didn't recognize him. Because they didn't expect a baby. They didn't expect humility or service. They didn't expect his circle of people to be outcasts. They expected him to overturn kingdoms and overturn government and align with their ideas and their expectations. And when he was there, many people missed out on who God literally was in front of them because of who they thought he should be. We can have hopes and dreams for the future of our church and our families and our communities, but how you exit this season of your life that you're currently in is how you will enter the next one. And the people in Israel, they were unfaithful in Egypt, and when they got to the other side of the river, they were still unfaithful. They were rebellious in Egypt, and when they got to the other side of the river, they were still rebellious. And that's the way it works in our life. Like you think, oh, next year I'll be more disciplined. In 5 years from now, I'll have this, and we have these goals and these good ideas. But if we're not starting now, like how we exit today is how we'll enter tomorrow. And if we want to see these things come true, if we want to participate in the promises of God, we have to align our character and our spirit with his today so that we don't miss it. This past year, so like how you exit. So the Egyptians, the Israelites, they were worshiping Egyptian gods, which is essentially what ended up being the big thing, because they were okay to worship God, but they also wanted to worship all these other gods as well. And that was kind of their downfall, is their traditions from before. But this past year with the youth, youth is done, and the first couple weeks of not having to come here were really nice, but I actually kind of miss them now. So I talked to them before church, and I'm going to make them help me with this sermon because I think they're the best. But this past year with the youth, we talked a lot about belief and how belief doesn't change the truth. It just changes our ideas and our perspectives. So just because I believe God isn't real doesn't make him cease to exist. But if I believe God exists, it changes the way I interact with the world. If I believe God is good, it doesn't magically make a bad God good, but it makes my view of God and my view of my circumstances different. My belief does not have the power to make lies truth and truth a lie. God does that. He decides what's true. He decides what's righteous. And what we're left with is the opportunity to believe him or not, to partner with him or not, to say what he views as righteous, or make our own path. We don't have the power to decide truth for ourselves. God does that. Our beliefs will produce action, though. So if you don't know what you believe, if you're like, I don't know, just look at your habits. Look at the way you live your life. Look at the circles you run in. Look at the things you do each and every day, because what you believe will produce an action, will produce a habit. And you'll find yourself doing things that you're like, I wouldn't in my head say I believe that, but I obviously believe that because I'm doing it and I'm drawn to it. And we know our belief has power, even though it doesn't have the power to change the truth. We know it has power because in John 14:12-14, it says that whoever believes in me, they'll do the work. So he's saying it will produce work. And they will do even greater things than I have, because I'm going to the Father. And I'll do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. You may ask for anything in my name, and I will do it with you. He's saying that if you believe my truth, you have full access to the Father. If you believe my truth, the resources of heaven are yours. And not yours as in, oh, I'm going to get a really nice house and a really nice car, and I'm never going to have a trouble in my life. It's like, what we need for what he's called us on, he will provide and prepare us for. If we believe in him, we will do his work. And not in the moments when we get to hold a microphone, but in the small moments, in the insignificant moments, when we pick our kids up from school, when we're chatting with people at the back of the church, when we're at work, when we're doing things that are just everyday things. It will change the way we do them if we believe that God is God and that his truth is true. See, I believe that your simple yes to God in any season can change the rest of your life. I believe that your obedience to God today has the power to ripple through generations. I believe that seemingly insignificant moments will preach louder than anything you could say into a microphone. Because when our lives and not just our words reflect Jesus, there is nothing that he cannot redeem, restore, and make new. I believe that if you say yes to God in the little moments, it will allow the Spirit to transform the way you think so that you can recognize the good, perfect, and pleasing will of God like it talks about in Romans 12. And the difference between those who get it and those who don't is one terrible word: discipline. It takes work to stick it out through the seasons of chaos that this side of heaven has to offer. It takes consistently coming to the feet of Jesus with a humble heart and open hands. And one of the biggest things I hear from the youth is actually still one of the biggest things I hear from my friends, and one of the biggest things that you guys will feel, maybe not say out loud because you guys are more mature than us. And also, the way the Israelites, what they were thinking is, I just don't wanna. I don't feel like it today. I don't want to do it right now. You see, like we want the result without the work. And so I did ask some of my favorite youth, just kidding, only the ones that were here and willing to do it. So Hannah, Nevaeh, and Landon are going to come up and they're going to help me with this analogy because they've heard it so many times they could probably just preach it themselves. I knew you were going to do that. She's shaking her head no at me. Nevaeh, come, please. I need this. Hannah's coming. She's the boldest. Landon, you're grounded. Just kidding. I force them to do things all the time. But I've actually done this analogy so many times that it genuinely is overdone to the point where I told them what it was and they all knew it, which for youth, that's actually a big deal. So maybe I'll do it one more time. But Nevaeh is going to represent our truth here, and she's going to come stand at the front of the line, and she's truth, okay? So she sees the whole view. She's walking the path. She knows what's happening. She's sure. She's steady. She doesn't change. She has her eyes on what is ahead. Hannah over here, she's faith, and so she comes and she walks behind truth right here. So you face the other way.
Where?
Right here.
Here?
They don't actually know it that well. Just kidding. You can turn and face this way, and you can turn and face this way. And then Faith, she has her hand on Truth's shoulder, so she can see. She understands what's going on. She's maybe not as sure as Truth is. She's maybe not as unchanging as Truth is, but she knows where Truth is going. She believes Truth is true. She's got her eyes set on what's ahead. And then there's Feelings over here who, well, he doesn't come around very often, and when he does, he kind of strolls up behind Faith, and he's like, what's going on? And then she's like, we're going this way, and he goes, maybe for a bit, Feelings will come and push Faith, but for the most part, Feelings is unsteady. He has his own plan. He has his own ideas. He falls off the tightrope every time he tries to walk in a straight line, not because Feelings are bad, not because Feelings are stupid, not because Feelings can't glorify God, but because Feelings are unstable and they don't match up with the power of truth. They don't match up with the reality of faith. You guys can sit down. Give them a round of applause. You see, we cannot want to do a lot of things that we have to do. And it's easy to coast through life and be like, I'm just going to do what I want to do. I'm going to feed myself the way I want to feed myself. I'm going to do what's right for me, and what's right for me is right for me, and what's right for you is right for you, and that's okay because that's the world we live in. And you can believe that, but it's not truth. And if you believe that, you will miss out on what God is doing in this season and the next. So maybe there isn't a literal golden calf standing in front of you blocking your view from what God is doing on the mountain. But is there pride? Is there unmet expectations? Is there jealousy? Is there anger, hurt, lust, or greed blocking our view from how God is moving right now? Are we distracted or complacent? Are we letting the way things have always been predict the way things will be? Or are we letting the Spirit transform the way we think so that when God moves, we don't miss it? Will our hands work to glorify the Lord, or when we look back on all the little moments leading us to now, will we see that all they built was a golden calf or an idol? Let's choose to believe his words so we can grip on to what awaits. Let the Spirit transform our character and build in us integrity so that whatever the Lord leads us to, we are prepared. I'm going to pray. And then you guys are dismissed, I believe. So, happy Sunday. I'll pray.